Today, Wilbur and I are going to show you how we upholstered this velvet headboard for just $53.
The first step in this project is creating a headboard template. I'm going to be doing this with some wrapping paper that I had laying around the house from last year. I would recommend using a wrapping paper that is a solid color or at least has those grids on the back so that when you draw out your pattern, you're able to see it. I hung the paper on the wall with just some tape. I used packing tape, but you can use Scotch tape as well. The packing tape did a really good job of keeping the paper on the wall, and I actually kept it on the wall for a couple of days to live with the shape before I decided to cut it out of the wood. I'm using a pen to draw the shape of the headboard. I went with a really traditional shaped headboard. However, you can really draw any shape for the headboard. I just chose to do traditional because I'm kind of going for a vintage look in our room. I was originally just going to draw half of the headboard and then I was going to just use the half to cut it out of the wood, but instead I decided to cut out my shape, fold the paper in half, and then cut the exact mirrored image on the other side of the paper. In order to make this perfectly even on both sides, I needed to measure out the bed. We have a California King, and I decided that the length that I wanted was 72 inches for the headboard. So I found the center and then marked it on the paper and just cut it out on the other side. In order to get an even cut, I had to tape the edges of my original cut to itself so that it wouldn't roll as I'm trying to cut it all out. At first I was unsure about the shape, so I taped it back to the wall so that we could live with it for a couple of days before I went out and purchased wood. Kyle broke his collarbone, so I had to wait anyways to have my dad come and help me go to Home Depot to get some wood, and I got some footage of that. Let me show you.
When I was a little child, I naturally would see magic in the world around me. I often get so tired, it's harder just to be fascinated, breathing free. But I can hear raindrops tap dancing on the roof. It's like they're calling out, don't lose your youth, 'cause I can stay inside and step away inside, or make today just a little less mundane. Oh, I can stay inside.
After getting the chipboard home, I started drawing out my design with a Sharpie. I'm using some washers as pattern weights. I actually use these in sewing all of the time. I'm using a straight edge to connect the line to the bottom of the chipboard, and then we're going to start cutting this out. I used a jigsaw to cut out the design. This is the first time I'm using a jigsaw, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, and I cannot wait to use more tools, more power tools. It was so fun. I highly recommend. If you're scared, don't be. It's a lot easier than it looks. If you don't have a jigsaw, I'm pretty sure you can rent one from Home Depot, but you can also buy one secondhand. I've seen a lot of people sell them for pretty inexpensive. I'm using the jigsaw to go straight up this one side of the chipboard, so it's a lot easier to maneuver around, and that way I'm not sitting in some sort of awkward angle to try to cut this side. I will be keeping this piece of wood because you never know what type of project you could use it for on a later date. Now it's time to cut out this other side, and I'm just doing the same thing I did before, following my line. I will say that on these corners, it kind of got away from me, so I chose to take the sander and started sanding down the edges, especially because when you're doing this, it kind of kicks up some of the pieces of the wood, so it is a good idea to sand it anyways. And I'm just using an old piece of sandpaper that was on here before. I think it was a 120 grit, but as long as you get all of the splinters off, you are good to go.
My vision for this headboard is for it to be wrapped in fabric. So I headed over to SAS Fabrics in Tempe, Arizona. They're kind of like a Ross for fabric, so it's really inexpensive. Let me show you what I got. I got this brown velvet. I got 3 3/4 of a yard. It came out to be 19 for all of this yardage. Also picked up some batting while I was there. However, this is not enough batting to cover the entire headboard, so I'm going to be using it to almost like round off the tops of the edges of the headboard. I just think it'll give it a really nice look so it's not so harsh on the edges. I had to pick up some foam while I was there as well for this project, so I got a roll of foam. It's 96 inches long. It was $18 for this entire roll. So let me show you how I'm going to upholster this headboard.
I'm using Loctite spray adhesive to secure the foam to the wood. This isn't enough foam to completely cover, so I'm using some foam that I had laying around from an old project that I did on a previous headboard. I'm just spraying it on, and then I'm going to be placing the foam down. I'm not really sure why this footage was out of focus, but I promise it does get better. I learned through this process that it's easier to spray the wood, spray the foam, let them become tacky, and then place it down. If you let it become tacky, you won't be fighting with the foam as much, and it'll just be an easier process overall. Once I got a lot of the foam secure, I decided to start trimming down the pieces, especially this really long piece, so that it would actually sit flush. I'm using just a regular kitchen knife, but I would use maybe a box knife or a utility knife. That way you're not ruining your kitchen knives. I filled in any little spots, like gaping spots, with extra foam, and then once it dried, it was time to bring it inside. I first laid the fabric on the floor face down, so wrong sides facing up, and then we placed the headboard on top of the fabric. You will want to make sure that the fabric is completely smoothed down before placing the headboard on top of the fabric. It'll just make it easier in the long run. I'm using this electric staple gun that I got from Walmart. I don't recommend it. It really didn't do much better of a job than me using the hand staple gun. I ended up having to hammer a lot of the staples down, so honestly I would just use a hand staple gun. It'll be easier in the long run. It still hurts your hands even when you're using the electric one, so honestly I wouldn't waste your money. I forgot to tell you that I ended up not using the batting. However, I would recommend you use it in your project. It creates a smoother finish on the edges. The reason I didn't use it for mine is because I ended up not even having enough to cover the edges, and I wanted this project to be done. I was too lazy to go buy more, so I definitely would recommend using it, and honestly I wish I did. On the parts of my headboard that kind of dip in, I had to make relief cuts so that I could make sure that the fabric was completely flush and taut with these edges. To make sure you have no wrinkles on the other side of your fabric, you want to make sure that you're pulling this really taut as you're stapling it down. So I'm like really pulling as I'm putting staples in. I also put a staple in every single area possible so that this was like super secure and there were no wrinkles along the edges. The more staples you put in, the less wrinkles. I trimmed off all the extra fabric, and then I literally just wedged this in between our bed frame and the wall. I didn't do anything fancy to hang it up. Okay, enough talking. Let me show you how this turned out.
Another lazy afternoon. The clouds covered in gray. Third coffee of the day. Almost fell asleep.
I hope you loved this video. If you want to see more DIYs like this one, click either of these links. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe because I'd love to see you again.